Best Coast Pairings appears to be filtering out some 40k stats providers. Games Workshop have had more scalper dramas with people trying to sell more books of their Horus Heresy. Kill Team Typhon sold out in seconds. It looks like Etsy is restricting 3D printing in a big way that might make it not the place to go for the wargaming communities. Let's do a big roundup of some 40k relevant news. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where today I thought we'd round up a whole bunch of small interesting 40k news story type things. Stuff that's happened over the past week or so, but probably didn't need a full video in its own right, talking about all the things just mentioned, plus Games Workshop's pre-orders both last week and this week, and a few more interesting articles and teasers and things I've seen discussed online. First up, last week it looks like Best Coast Pairings has taken issue with some Warhammer 40k stat sites. It looks like multiple people have been reporting that they seem to be making their job harder, with each of them having their different takes on cataloguing and analysing the high levels of 40k tournament play. Best Coast Pairings is the app that most Warhammer 40k events use worldwide, with organising and cataloguing their events, the place where you submit lists and get pairings and then can see results afterwards. Games Workshop themselves appear to have partnered with them, and you can sign into them via your My Warhammer account. So if you want to see army lists and rosters, it's behind a paywall, usually $50 annually, which I'd say is a price worth paying for a lot of people who are more engaged with the tournament scene and always looking at lists and things, but probably isn't going to be of much interest to the more casual 40k player who might only want to check in on some winning army lists from time to time. It means there's a lot of interest in that army list stats and data, though only a few people might be subscribed to it, so you often see people reposting a certain successful army lists, and then these stat sites analysing the data that they can see from the app, plugging them all into big tables and getting army win rates and things. Various websites and content creators use the data in different ways, some looking at win rates, army and detachment performance, and some sites reposting and sharing lists and talking about them. Maybe more websites, but also YouTube content creators, including myself. But recently, last week, a few of the stat sites have reported that they're limiting the amount of views of army lists. So after you hit a certain excessive number, that I think usually would be far more than what any casual user is likely to use from them, you reportedly can't see any more army lists. I think last month they made some similar sort of changes that stopped people exporting army lists quite so easily, and to my limited understanding I believe that's why StatCheck 40k didn't update for a while, and now Meta Monday and the site called 40k Event Tracker both seem to have been impacted by this. It might not be the most helpful thing in the world for getting big data on what detachments and units people are using in lists, even if you can still see the pairings and who won them well enough. I'd guess maybe the primary motivation for this might be to stop the sort of reposting every list sites out there, which I guess are basically taking the primary reason to actually subscribe to Best Coast Pairings and then just making that data public. So it certainly feels like you can understand the motivations there if it's literally doing that en masse. It definitely feels like a bit of a grey area though, as it's basically Best Coast Pairings using their position as the default tournament app to charge to see army lists, where they're only generated by the players attending their events. And there's plenty of variations out there on Best Coast Pairings that are used in different countries and don't stop people looking in from viewing army lists. Paywalling the list data definitely doesn't feel like a positive for the wider Warhammer community though, and a bit annoying when it interferes with stats collectors, given it's not like Best Coast Pairings actually does anything to report or analyse their own statistics, not in the same way as StatCheck or Meta Monday or things do. In any case, with a few new restrictions, it certainly seems to have stirred up some sentiments to find alternatives to Best Coast Pairings. There's various people that have made their own homegrown versions over the years. Two of the ones that seem to be the most popular are Mini Headquarters, widely used in France and Belgium, and Tabletop Herald, which is used across Germany. I feel like it still might not be the best solution if every country winds up making their own in-house version of Best Coast Pairings, so it just becomes enormously fragmented. I feel like if event organisers did want to switch, it might be worth going for one of the ones that's already existent out there. I feel like Best Coast Pairings does work well, but it's never really been famed for its user interface, and some of them do make some improvements on it. I certainly don't know the pros, cons and ins and outs of either of these from a tournament organiser's perspective, but I'd certainly be interested as to how much demand there'd be for people attending events, both tournament organisers and players, and whether you'd think about moving away from Best Coast Pairings and trying out one of the alternatives in the future. One thing that I thought was interesting from last week was Games Workshop's site temporarily getting shut down. If you went to the Warhammer web store on Tuesday last week, you wouldn't be able to buy any Warhammer for a good few hours. I will be greeted by a message saying about how the site had been temporarily taken offline, and it seems that the issue responsible were orders of the Era of Ruin book, which had gone live for an unusual Tuesday pre-order. This one's a sort of epilogue anthology to the Great Big Siege of Terror series, which have been coming out in signed special editions in these sort of red-brown covers. And every time that they seem to go live, they look like they get bought out and scalped. I'm sure plenty do wind up in the hands of actual hobbyists, but a lot of people clearly just pick them up and then resell them on eBay immediately, where collectors who desperately want the book are willing to pay hundreds for them. It seems that it might have been for that reason that Games Workshop decided to release this one on a Tuesday. They did at a pre-order slot of 10 AM, and I wonder if this was potentially to test out anti-scalping things, implementing a queue sort of system, but then whatever happened, it clearly looks like it didn't work, and seems like their response was to pull down the Warhammer web store for a few hours while they got things fixed. They posted an explanation to their social medias, saying they might have noticed that Warhammer.com went down for a while, stated that they noticed that scalpers were bypassing their normal security measures. They're pausing the launch of the book, cancelling the scalper orders, and putting them back on sale at a later date, sharing an email interest list if you did want to pick it up, stating that those emails would only be used for notifications for that, and wouldn't sign you up to other marketing things. Looks like the site was down for a good few hours after that, though I guess they'll be relaunching the book at a later date. On the one hand, still seems that Games Workshop's absolutely having enormous trouble with people scalping their stuff. Kind of shows that whatever things that they had to try and put in place to make sure the books go to real people just didn't work this time. It definitely feels pretty refreshing to have them actually try and go head on to try and address it if they feel like that there was an unacceptable amount going to scalpers this time around. And quite nice to have an honest explanation that isn't just marketing speak. It does look like this was generally received fairly positively. I guess we'll find out when that goes live again, and looks like nobody's been pre-selling it on eBay just yet at least, so I guess that's a win in the short term at least. Let me know if you had any experience of those pre-orders down in the comments. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Warhaus. They're a discount retailer gaming store based in Australia. They opened earlier this year in April and sell Warhammer products at 23% off Games Workshop prices, one of the single best discount retailers in the world. I'll leave their website links down in the video description. It's generally quite easy to search and quite nicely organised in my opinion. Fairly easy to navigate, and they tend to request fairly maximal numbers of pre-orders, at least when I've checked them out to check if they have stock. They tend to do quite well on that front. They have all the normal things you'd expect of a discount retailer. You can back order things if they're not on stock and then they come in from Games Workshop. They have a discount loyalty scheme to generate further savings if you sign up with that, and they have free shipping over 150 Australian dollars. Their store's open in Corinda outside Brisbane. You can check it out if you happen to be nearby. They've got good transport links and a full-size gaming table in store. They've recently started shipping some of their other products internationally, with a few of their in-house things such as this painting handle and craft knife. After the most recent 40k releases, looks like they've still got some good stock of the Chaos Knights, both the Codex and the Ruinator pattern available at 23% off if you wanted to pre-order either of those. In any case, a big thank you to them for sponsoring the video. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description. Moving on, next up let's talk about Kill Team Typhon, where it looks like the release of that went kind of predictably and left lots and lots of people disappointed, unable to pick up the kit that Games Workshop had been advertising at them. This one was always going to be an enormously popular box with the new Tyranid Raveners, the big amount of fun Tyranid terrain, plus some Hormagaunts and things. It certainly seemed tempting enough to pick up for Tyranid collectors for 40k, never mind people who wanted it for either Kill Team or the Admech side of things. Games Workshop generally tends to make very small amounts of these Kill Team versus box sets for some reason. I guess some are more popular than others, though this one looked like it was going to be a very interesting one. Discount retailers got tiny amounts. I had multiple reports of people getting around about 5 or 6 in the USA, including discount retailers who'd requested far more than that, and most stores that stocked it at discount seemed to be sold out in seconds, the Games Workshop web store following pretty shortly after. I asked you guys in a channel poll as to whether or not you were able to buy it or not. For the people who actually wanted to buy it, looks like only a third of people were able to pick up the kit, so literally 2/3 of people who tried to seek it out were unable to because it sold out too fast. Certainly a pretty disappointing number for a cool new kit that lots of people clearly wanted to get their hands on. As a result, it looks like scalping prices for people breaking down the kit into its elements have gone up really high. Taking a look at prices here in the UK, it looks like people are pre-selling the Raveners for around about £60, so a massive markup on the around about £36 that you'd expect to be able to buy them if they're the usual Kill Team £42 and then you assume a 15% discount from a discount seller. The models are pretty cool, but it must be very frustrating for Tyranid players that want to pick them up. In theory, they've been released, but you can't really buy them, and they're probably not going to get individual releases until the next big Kill Team Versus box comes out, and that could be literally months away at this point. I'd also guess that the Servitor Battleclade might have far less demand versus the Tyranids. It does look that one's more selling for around about the £40 mark or so in the UK. That seems at least fairly in line with the expected release price, though again will be a markup compared with the discount rates that it comes at in Typhon. As ever, not great news on the Kill Team Versus box releases. I guess there might be a few more copies of the kit going live in physical Warhammer stores on the 28th of June. If you have one locally, there's a good chance there might be some more stock waiting there. Certainly not an option for everyone who don't have a store nearby though. One thing that maybe seems to be a fairly major blow to the 3D printing miniatures community is that it looks like Etsy is cracking down on people selling 3D printed items via its web store. I guess that idea and motivation is to maybe purge a huge amount of duplicate items on their store, rather than having lots of people sell exact copies of the same 3D printed stuff. I guess almost certainly not primarily aimed at the wargaming community, but looks like it'll affect the business models of 3D printing creators and print farms in a big way. Basically, it looks like Etsy's rule change is that you're no longer allowed to sell 3D printed products who have designs that aren't made by the seller themselves, so they're trying to focus more on individual sellers who are actually the craftsmen for the items in question. I guess maybe trying to get slightly back towards their roots of individual artisan traders, as opposed to lots of potentially low quality stores popping up everywhere selling the same sort of tat. It does seem that the change is pretty directly at odds with the 3D printing wargame community though, as the way that it often works is that you have 3D printing creators, maybe working either on their Patreon pages or My Mini Factory. They'll generally represent the designers who spend their days actually designing new miniatures. Some of them likely run print farms themselves, but understandably you'd expect most of the designers to actually be focused on the designing of the miniatures, and for their offerings they generally tend to have people having license to print individual miniatures for themselves, and then trader licenses where they say that you can sell these designs of miniatures if you pay us this higher amount subscription fee per month. You then get quite a lot of people who do the actual printing of the miniatures, listing their items on Etsy and eBay and other places, so not the actual creator but the people who have licensed the designs, and these would be forbidden under these changes. I guess this has had quite a bit of impact on the industry, and whether or not it seriously impacts creators might depend on the exact miniatures that they're selling and their business model for doing so, but certainly seems that there'll be far less alternative sculpt 3D printed proxy style designs being hosted on Etsy as a way to distribute them. Getting back to Warhammer release things, and as well as Kill Team Typhon, they also had some plastic Heresy kits go live at the last weekend. It seems that if you want to pick up the Tarantula turrets and the Rapier batteries, both of those are now on sale. For the Tarantula batteries, I believe it's two of them, either for $60, £36 or €45, and there's two different options for the kits, either the air defense ones on the left, or the more direct fire ones with heavy bolters, las cannons, melters or volkite on the right. Again, there's some other kits that have been retranslated from resin into plastic. They're primarily aimed at Heresy, though they do have some Legends rules for 40k. The Tarantula datasheets seem to be split between the 40k Space Marine Legends section and the Legends of the Horus Heresy section. For the air defense ones, they're immobile platforms that are 70 points to field each one, and have a bunch of weakish AP1 and damage 1 attacks with anti-fly. I guess you can functionally field them, but they're pretty awful for the points. They maybe feel like the sort of unit that might not be impossible to kit bash as well, depending on spares that you have lying around. The other things that went live are the Rapier batteries. These have often been an interesting choice, both for the Heresy era and often some dedicated Space Marine heavy fire support for 40k too. Again, there's two different kits of these ones with the laser destroyer and the quad launcher, and the other kit with a quad heavy bolter and a great big grav cannon on the right there. Looks like these ones are more expensive versus the Tarantula batteries, £44 or $70, and come with two of the Rapier batteries included. They also have some Legends rules, I believe in the Heresy era Legends section. The 40k ones just treat them as a single model with toughness 6 and a 2+ save. The laser destroyer is pretty punchy, 3 shots at strength 14, AP 4 and damage d6 +1 with heavy and lethal hits if it's stationary. And the quad launcher's got rules for firing either direct or indirect. They're probably not going to be super mainstream for 40k. I feel like they've been a miniature that lots of people wouldn't have been against picking up in plastic. Now they're at least a tiny bit less expensive than Forge World prices. They're still maybe a bit more than I would have hoped for in a plastic kit though. For this weekend's upcoming release, it looks like it's an army launch for the Old World. One of the big reveals in their reveal shows earlier in the year was the Grand Cathay release. Kind of a surprise given that the Old World has been largely about rehabilitating old Warhammer fantasy kits, just having a few small plastic or resin releases thrown in. For this one though, they've added in an entirely new faction to the game, Grand Cathay having been in the lore and in the Warhammer Total War series for some time, a sort of Chinese dynasties themed army, and coming in with quite a bunch of plastic kits between cavalry, infantry, some big artillery, and various wild and wonderful exotic centerpieces. It looks like this one's just the first wave of them and isn't every single kit that they've revealed in the big show. They're going live on Saturday the 21st of June, so the full release will be Saturday the 5th of July. One of the big centerpieces is this Grand Cathay Battalion, going for a bit more than a Combat Patrol box set, and it looks like this will be an ongoing discount kit for the army. As well as that, the releases they're coming out with first are a few of these slightly more standard generic characters, one riding an Eastern Dragon type thing called a Great Spirit Longma, 2 minor characters in Gate Masters, And then 2 of the fairly cool big centerpiece kits are going on sale as well. There's the Cathay Sentinel, these sort of statues come to life. That looks like it's $128. And then there's the fairly mad Sky Lantern. That's going to be a big centerpiece of $160 apparently. It does seem like a pretty awesome wild kit floating above the rest of the army. As ever, if you were looking to pre-order any of these, feel free to check out the discount retailers down in the video description. They usually save between 10 and 20% depending on where you are around the world, and anything bought through the specific ones links down in the video description helps to support Auspex Tactics as well. I'll be interested to hear if any of you are thinking of picking up any of the Grand Cathay things. The miniatures were very well received. I can't help but think that it's probably going to be one of the releases where people are very technically impressed by the miniatures, but whether or not that actually jumps people into starting an entire army from the old world might be a bit more of a question. Finally, for a few more smaller things, there was a Rumour engine that looks like part of a power weapon. This one could be potentially Imperial or maybe Leagues of Votann. Both of those seem pretty possible for releases later in the year. We know we've got a bunch of Space Marine releases to come, and Leagues of Votann are going to be getting a second wave. To me, it doesn't look enormously Imperial given all the studs on it. So perhaps could be a Leagues of Votann plasma weapon or something. It's not really super specific though, and I guess we'll find out later. Finally, just for another random thing that I saw shared about in the wake of the Chaos Knight list was this older artwork from them. This one's definitely not news or anything, but just a cultist style picture that I hadn't thought about too much for a good while now, showing some human auxiliaries with some great big heretical chaos shields. Just feels like if they ever did decide to go down the whole route of some knight feudal bannermen to go alongside their super heavy walkers, this would probably be the way that they went. I guess we might expect these guys for Chaos Knights. They'll probably have some sort of Imperial counterpart that's looking all a bit more chivalrous. Feels like it might not be the worst idea for them to release at some point in the future, given that both the factions often make good use of their allied choices, whether demons or Imperial agents. It might be nice to have something a bit more on-faction themed to fill that battlefield role, if it's going to be an ongoing thing. Otherwise, at the moment, we've got really quite a lot of 40k releases outstanding. It feels like there's lots of things that have been revealed quite a while ago that could be possible on the horizon any time now. The Imperial Knights Codex to follow on from the Chaos Knights one. Seems they gave a fairly big break between the two, surprisingly. Space Wolves need their full release wave, with Logan Grimnar and the kits going on sale individually. So far they've just had their launch box. The Grey Knights were revealed alongside their Chaos Deity Codexes, with their expanded Grandmaster kit and their Battle Force box. I might have expected them to come out before the Chaos Knights or Imperial Knights, but seems that the Traitor Knights got the jump on them. And then there's the Horus Heresy Task 9 box set. Games Workshop's been putting a whole load of hype articles and previews out for that over the past few weeks. Feels like it's not going to be too far away. Beyond that, we've also got some more outstanding things. The Black Templars Codex, that Captain Centos model, and the Space Marine drop pods. And then from Games Workshop's roadmap, we've got the individual releases from the more core Codex chapters that looks like they're getting content later in the year, and some Leagues of Votann. Certainly feels like 2025 has been a busy one for Warhammer 40k so far. 4 big faction launch waves so far, and really quite a lot of codexes and small model releases besides that. In any case, let me know all your thoughts as to any of the things discussed in the video down in the comments, and certainly any other insights that I might have missed or glossed over. It's always appreciated. Thanks to Warhaus for sponsoring the video. If you want some discount Warhammer and you're based down under, then you could check them out. Their link's down in the video description. If you enjoyed the videos, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you'd like to support the channel and keep all the videos coming, then Auspex Tactics also has a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to check them out. A big thank you to anyone helping out there. In any case though, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.